pandemic. We are working virtually, but we are doing appropriate use of this technological advances so that we can meet soon one on one. I want to thank Sandra, Luna, and everyone, Alejandra Cole from the Commission for the Truth and the Non-Repetition Commission, Sebastian, also an activist and a PhD student, and Erika Tobon. For some years, I've been working with her on the Pacific route in the coffee belt, and she's working on aesthetics and creation. What a pleasure for us to be in this panel. As Elvia said, it's been called Gender Perspective Vis-à-Vis Peace Challenges in Colombia. When we were thinking of this, we looked into histories of the Commission of the Pacific Route and Sebastián Giraldo's experience in human rights and LGBTQ groups. This is our proposal for today. We also want to do an analysis of the implications of this fourth year of implementation of the peace agreement in the negotiating process between the Juan Manuel Santos administration and the FARC guerrilla movement. It took a few years to do this negotiation, and in this process, we women were able to participate directly and develop what is now known as the Gender Commission, making possible for desires, expectations, and proposals of women to be present in the development of the peace agreement. And we've also been working in the different territories so that those expectations in the agreement may be materialized throughout this implementation process. Unfortunately, the scenario is not white or black or white. Here we have a scale of gray colors we have to recognize. If we could set on the table, for instance, major difficulties and concerns we have vis-a-vis threats, aggressions, and killings of women defending human rights. Important leaders who participated in the peace agreement are being murdered, but also from the Truth Commission and our organization, we continue insisting for the implementation of this agreement that has been so costly for us. We've been working on it so much, and we shall continue working on it, always ready to continue in this struggle and in this fight. Now, let us give the floor now to Alejandra Call. She is a researcher and women's human rights activist. She also does a lot of work on gender perspectives. She will talk about transitional justice and gender perspective, challenges of the peace agreements in peace in terms of social justice. Yes, Alejandra, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone with us today. Thank you so much, Gina, for your generous words, Erica, Sandra, and everyone here. Our friends that are listening to us, thank you so much. I'm Alejandra Col. I share gender work vis-a-vis the Colombian reality. Let me tell you about the context. Thanks to incidents of women's committees, the Colombian Truth Commission is doing specific work on research of violence against women in the armed conflict. This is not an easy thing. The first Truth Commission is doing this from the beginning. This is the first time it does that from the beginning, thanks to the incidents of the women's movement. You will hear more about it later on in this panel. There's been strong incidents of women in the peace negotiations and agreements. Women played a very important role, and Sandra played a very important role. You will be hearing from her momentarily. We created this through the peace agreements with the participation of institutions, For instance, the one searching for the disappeared, the Search Commission. We're so similar to Mexico on this. We have Special Justice for Peace, which is a judicial entity, a jurisdictional body, sanctioned people who are responsible for disappearances. And we have the Truth Establishment Commission, the reasons why has war lasted so long, why do those motivations exist for this conflict. So the women's movement is of different groups, and they analyze impact of war on women and LGBT people. In fact, in the Colombia Truth Commission, we started creating the first themes. It was the gender perspective group to start investigation, but especially actively listening to victims, because in Colombia we had a big advantage. We had this mandate with social organizations that had analyzed the situation so much throughout the Colombian War. So we used this type of mechanism, but there was so much material we could use on what was happening in the Colombian War. Now that we're talking about gender and transitional justice, we were also asking about the impact of transitional justice on women. We had experiences in 2005, a legislation called Justice and Peace to sanction paramilitary groups, to give them benefits, and to talk about the responsibilities of their doings. There was cemetery silence, especially on sexual offenses. So we started asking, what is transitional justice good for? Does it help women? Does it reflect needs? Because transitional justice looks for more flexible justice to help countries transition from one state of war or dictatorship to a state of peace or democracy. So we were wondering, are we going to continue or not? And this is an experience which has many aspects we can rescue. Some people were expelled because they didn't recognize violence. Some justice and peace decisions started looking into things like reproductive rights. No one spoke about it. Colombia is a pioneer on these issues. We want to work on this so much. The thing is, how can we work with all this information as women's organizations using transitional experience of justice and peace of 2005, the pros and cons? And there was a lot of expectation on the answers, specialized justice units, for instance. That's the context we started working for you to have an idea of why we did what we did. Where are we at right now? Since 2017, we created those three institutions, and we've been working since 2018, 2.5 years about. So I thought, how can we talk about war? This could be for the entire afternoon. And I thought, well, we have to look at Mexico as well. We have so many common things with Mexico. Things that happen in Colombia happen also in Mexico. A lot of the things I will tell you will make sense in terms of the Mexican experience as well. It's very complex to have a gender perspective truth in the era of gender ideology. Who invented that term? Who made it up? I don't fully understand it, and there's no definition for it. Yes, but for instance, why does the gender perspective make people be so afraid of the term? Why does it scare people? Well, the Truth Commission in Colombia has been openly recognized as a feminist commission. That's a big challenge. It's the first commission that does this publicly. It has a gender or feminist perspective. This sounds very complicated, but it's very simple. One, adapting methodologies for women needs. Two, having concepts including the causes of the conflict and really looking in detail into LGBT women, people. So we are a feminist truth commission in Colombia with specific open spaces for LGBTQI. This has been a challenge. This part of the world, those issues are stigmatized. Sadly, the word feminism results in more fear than feminicide. So we have to remember we are calling ourselves feminists. Another challenge is talking about LGBTI people in a complex context of very strange societies in Latin America, very homophobic, transphobic, and the Truth Commission wants to contribute to why is it that things have taken place the way they have here? Why have lesbians, trans, and gays been treated so badly? We want to do an in depth analysis of this. In spite of the fact we're not a judicial body, transitional justice goes beyond the court concept. It has to do with mechanisms helping victims to find truth, justice, repair, and not repetition. We are looking at the situation to help LGBTIQ people to see why the freedom has been restricted, unlike restrictions of other segments of the population. And this organization was created some 9 years ago. This is a memory unit, and there's a marvelous text called Herein Lies the Difference. So, this has been an important document for our work in the Truth Commission to explain to LGBTI people why people wanted to annihilate difference and diversity. This means explaining the conflict itself, particularly explaining LGBTI experiences and why that's part of this framework. People of certain gender identities thinking that only some people deserve to be respected, but not others. This is one of the first countries, except for some countries where we are gathering voices, right? Where those people live, not at the international level, although we are working with international organizations, but also directly with voices. Many grassroots organizations have been created, are LGBTI people, to talk about sexual orientation, where Latin America is trying to go back to its past without recognizing diversity. Another major challenge in the Colombian context, with so many years of conflict, are people's expectations of the organizations of as well. Expectations of victims, thinking they're going to find the truth about their particular cases. In Colombia, the mandate is not to analyze case by case, but general characteristics, looking at the forest and not each tree individually. This is a major challenge when the report comes out in about a year and it has to be ready by November 2021. We have to meet those needs without clarifying each case because a truth commission like ours, created 3 years ago, cannot solve all the cases on a one by one case level. So people are waiting for a text talking about individual cases. or pointing out individual responsibilities of people who funded, who financed, or gave orders. And the Truth Commission in Colombia does not have that mandate. Individual responsibilities are discussed in justice structures. People in the Truth Commission are talking about general responsibilities. So it will be a complex task to match one thing with the other. This is one of the major difficulties of transitional justice. Sometimes it doesn't correspond to our Latin culture, thinking we should be punishing everything with incarceration. But unlike other truth commissions in Colombia, we think the information that the commission is gathering will not be shared with justice. Our report can be analyzed by them if they want, but we cannot share information with justice structures. So this is not good to prosecute attackers. This is a complex expectation to be managed, especially when you have a culture where you associate crime with punishment. This is not only a challenge for the Colombian Truth Commission, but for transitional justice in general, that is always betting on resigning traditional punishment in favor of a transition to improve people's quality of life, to access the truth. Why did something happen? For us to also look at non repetition and also having justice aimed at those that are responsible for those crimes and not on a one by one, but the leaders of those groups, not only those that carried out the offense. This is a major challenge. It's a big expectation of victims, of women, of organizations. Colombia has had such a long armed conflict, trying to analyze each one of the issues society is demanding from us with so little time and also scarce capacity. We've also had particular events. Two of our commissioners died just recently, August 7th this year. One died of COVID 19, October 31st, a year ago. Alfredo Morano, a commissioner, died. He was a fundamental part of this work. So, this context means everything is very complex. And the pandemic, we cannot hold meetings on one basis, sexual violence with the victims, talking to them, and there's distrust and using internet for all this. Well, this is a big challenge. What transitional justice is doing in this situation is very useful, and we women working in feminism are also working in women's particular context. In this pandemic, we have caregiving activities done by women. So we have to set a time for an interview and we have to make them feel at ease to talk about the problems they've had. This is a challenge. We have to adapt ourselves to conditions of telework and talk to the victims, meeting their needs as well, looking at gender issues, understanding that not everyone sees everything the same way. This is the big challenge we face, not only in the Truth Commission, but in the other new institutions. The two last challenges. First, a narrative that will unite a broken country through everything that happened to women, a narrative that will allow people to understand what happened in those experiences, how risky it is to be a woman, a trans, a lesbian woman. This is a complex situation because the country is highly divided. For a long time, people were not interested in talking about the armed conflict that became part of the landscape. People have to be informed, people have to be interested, and this is of the utmost importance. The Truth Commission of Guatemala, for instance, also faced this challenge, and now they are doing the final report and final recommendations. It is very difficult to do this when the country has had such long war conflicts? How did it start? The younger generations don't even understand how this war conflict started because they were not born yet. So this is a major challenge, generating this narrative to get people's attention, to seduce people, to seduce society. Another important narrative will have to transform our reality. This has to do with the work of the two commissioners that we lost in this last year. So they said we don't have to have academic narratives. They have to be narratives close to people. That's the most important thing. And narratives close to women, that they will appropriate those narratives, saying, this is my own story. That's a challenge for transitional justice. When women read the judicial decision, the report produced by transitional justice, people may see themselves represented in those narratives and stories. Solving doubts they have, that's a major challenge. Those narratives have to answer their questions. And in Colombia, we had a lot of stigma against women, against the victims. They were re victimized, and they were always told they were the guilty ones for what happened to them. So the commission has to face this challenge and say, no, the women are the victims. You cannot culpabilize the women. They are not the guilty ones because they had emotional or sentimental relations with someone who ended up attacking them or even killing them. You cannot see women as the attackers or as the criminals. I think I should stop here. I want to let the others take the floor. I have to leave before my colleagues. I have other appointments, but I thank you so much for listening to me. Yes, thank you so much. We don't have any questions yet. You have to leave because you have some commission commitments. So let's start with you before you leave us. There was something you mentioned on the juncture through this pandemic, making things so difficult. This is a big challenge for everyone, not only people working in education, but also people with social organizations. Particularly, this is generating difficulties, additional difficulties with women and people who have been the victims, who have suffered the conflict. So, could you share a couple of experiences? Some people might be interested and not overcome. This is difficult because these are the difficulties we're having. Well, open spaces. This is a big strategy in terms of opening a door from the virtual side of things. So, the YouTube channel, you will see there so many events, 16 to 20 a week. So, we've tried to do this in times of the pandemic. We are home, we are confined, but we cannot ralentize the pace in which we do things. We are just boosting public spaces to make the best of them. Yes, let me tell you what we've been listening to: reproductive rights, LGBTI people, women who participated in the armed conflict. That's one of the things we've done to try to make up for physical presence, the one on one meetings we are so used to having, meeting in person. So we cannot do that in each one of the territories. On the other hand, we've been doing more research to process information. This is something we are increasing since the beginning of the pandemic. And we are also looking at victims not trusting or not accessing those services. In Latin American countries like Colombia, internet access is not universal. We've had to change the situation. We've been working on it sometimes on a personal basis because there are many women who have no access to internet. And we have the commissioners, and the commissioner is trying to maintain, to keep up with the agenda. And this is not easy. We have so many mobility restrictions. We've had two truth meetings organized by the Truth Commission. We've been talking about attacks on medical staff and also the situation of indigenous peoples during the armed conflict in Colombia. We called one of the events the Indigenous Truth, and we had leaders of paramilitary groups who have recognized disappearances in indigenous communities. And they said, yes, this is one of those paramilitaries even gave his testimony saying, this is where we threw that person who is now disappeared. Well, we threw that person in the river. He said that in one of those meetings. So we are looking into answers to so many questions. We want the paramilitary to recognize what they did. Those that are responsible, we want them to have the necessary spaces to recognize their responsibilities and actions. Thank you, Aleja. There's something else I wanted to ask you about here. I wanted to, something about the first space of recognition, the people who are listening to us. The first recognition scenario on sexual violence in Colombia against women and LGBT people. That was the first one. It was held last year, and I think it's one of the main contributions of the Commission for recognition in a country that's so used to living with armed conflict. So violence has become a normal thing in Colombia. So this space of recognition is also a major contribution towards more democracy and towards helping this transition process. So what is the balance of that first recognition space against sexual violence? You spoke about the challenges of the Truth Commission, and you have a patriarchal society. There's a lot of violence against women, against LGBTQI people. So what can you comment on this? Well, I would love to have more time because that's a question that the victims can answer for you. We have a video. We did this video a year after. The event was a year ago, over a year ago, June 2019. In July of this year, we made this video. We produced it, and the women are there giving their testimonies. This is quite a positive thing. When we talk about recognition, in the Commission, we understand recognition in many forms. First, responsibility of the actors and also recognizing dignity of the victims. That's the modality of this public space, of this meeting place we were able to create to avoid confounding this with something else. We don't want this to be mistaken for something else. Those are the scenarios where we were looking for recognition through the victims of the responsibility of the aggressor. And this has a gender perspective. So we started with those gender issues, and then women looking for disappeared people. Well, we've had increases in threats against the victims after this meeting. We accompany them and protected them. We continue doing that. So we think that emotionally, at the individual level, we had 35 testimonies of women who participated a year ago. They way of looking at things with such a satisfactory fashion of looking at things, and they were able to tell the country everything they went through and its implications for over 30 years. Some found the opportunity to tell their relatives what had happened to them. And well, it was quite a positive experience. In terms of the impact for the country, I think we still have so much to do, so many needs. It doesn't seem quite logical, but Colombia is not interested in war anymore. But I'm talking about the real country, not of the social media. Not even 20% of the population use social media, but the deep Colombia, it has to do with everyday survival. And we have to say that many people are not even interested in those discussions because they're so worried about their own everyday survival. So we take one space to another space and we try to get people involved. And this happened for a month. We spoke to people, we had meetings, and we organized many activities. This is a space not as massive as we would have wanted it to be. But the truth of the matter is that people started asking very important questions. And it was quite impressive to see the participation of people out in the street. People saying, I have gone through violence. I have seen very violent actions in my country. And I think that the most important effect this generated was who are responsible for this. And a few months after that, they said, let's start a process to really confess we've committed sexual offenses against women and LGBTQ people. People came up and said that. I have to recognize, and that was just the beginning of a very long process. Those testimonies were so moving, so touching. They hit home, and people started building those bridges for victims to be able to speak with freedom without restrictions. So I think this was a very important experience. We had another event with a political woman kidnapped for 6 years by the FARC. Her name is Ingrid Betancourt. You might have heard about her. She spoke about her experience being kidnapped by Betancourt. And when she spoke just a few days ago, the FARC came out and they said, yes, kidnapping is a terrible crime. And they said, now we can use the word, we cannot change the term. We used to call it other things, but we were really out in the tangent on this. We have to call it kidnapping, and we were kidnapping people as we kidnapped Ingrid Betancourt. And they say, well, this term is not just used to go after us. There's a reason for people using this, and we were part of this. People are disappearing, people are appearing, and this is the reality we face. I think that was the main balance I can tell you about after the activities we organized. Well, thank you so much. We have so many questions after your presentation. And I think the people that are listening to us would also have their own concerns, but we have time limits.
The last question now. And there's some times and reflections that have been made because they have different chapters, also the one in Peru, the ones that they have chapters that are dedicated to violence against women, and particularly in sexual violence. Our report that we are going to have to wait for a year. In a year, we're going to be getting it. It's going to have a chapter in particular for violence against women and LGBT, or is going to be cross-sectional, including everything? Well, the commissioners have defined the structure. At the end, it's not at the end. We're still working on it. We are gathering, and we do have a proposal of 15 large patterns. And I can tell you that there's some that are particularly for LGTB. I am working one of them that is sexual violence, and we have to look at this, the final text. They're still looking into it because it's going to be very complex. We're using the presentation of the report in an alternative manner, not necessarily a huge text. I'm sure that is going to be there, but this is going to be for the 21st century. We're going to have to use another mechanism to socialize. And here I want to talk to you about the justice here, and we're working here in Colombia. This is an experiment between the three institutions to look for those that have those that are missing, and we're hopefully when that report is ready, we're going to have everything. We're going to be putting it together, and from that point on, we're going to have we're going to be working in different things of gender work, and that thought is going to be there. Is going to be like the legacy of the commission, and that's going to be for the benefit of the women. And we have a lot of things that we can use because the commission so far has received 36 reports of women organizations and LGBT people. We have 59% of testimonies are women from LGTB, and there's so much material. We don't know if it's going to be just expressed in one single chapter, but it's going to be cross-sectional in all the different themes, because it's not only women and people from LGBT. And thank you for making the effort of sharing with us and the people that are following this Congress and what the Commission is doing, and particularly from the group of gendered work. Our best regards for you. And I'm sorry with my colleagues that I can't stay any longer and I cannot listen. Thank you for having me here, and I'll see you soon. We're going to hear from our colleague and friend from the Pacific Route of Women, Sandra Liliana Luna Delgado. She is a feminist, activist, psychologist, specialized in local development with gender perspective, studies in culture of peace and conflict resolution, and attention in catastrophe. She's an activist and member of the National Coordination of Pacific Work for Women. And today she's going to be with us and sharing a presentation entitled Women Enrolled in the Implementation of the Peace Agreement 2019, Advances and Challenges of Gender Perspective for the Fulfillment of the 2030 Agenda. Welcome, Sandra. Welcome for being here. We have people that are logged on from Spain, from Mexico. It's interesting that we have this beyond Colombia, which it's important when we talk about these topics, and we do it virtually because we can meet with so many people. Alejita was talking about important things in the commission and the presentation of the report, but I want to discuss three things as a background. With the rest of this report very quickly. When this negotiation table was open, we saw what happens with women. We're not there. Even if we work, we look at everything, we have all the activities, we're not able to see as political stakeholders. In the past, we didn't have any women. We disappear as stakeholders with the possibility of negotiating. Well, this happens often. Women do not get anything for free. We always say that we have to work for it. We looked at some collective exercise of incidents with different organizations, In 2013, we started with the process, and thanks to this historical uh, the situation and many women organizations, the movement of women in Colombia, we have seen that this is unique in the world. We're setting the expectations higher to all these agreements. First, this is an agreement that acknowledges the participation of women. We start generating knowledge. 60% of people that were victims, they were women, and 18 were those that were expert organizations. They brought their proposals in context. It's an agreement where we were able to get 130 specific measures for women and children that is looking to transform the lives of them, particularly all of these women, because conflict has been more rural than urban. Aleja Cole was saying that this creates a subcommission of gender, because when you start with the negotiation, you start with both debates of the first two groups as a point of participation. And when all the publications were published, there was nothing else. There was all the incidents. We were able to get this subcommission, which is an instance that is looking for, that has the responsibility that each part of the agreement is there because of the rights of women. And this is achieved, and they create with the pressure of the movement that two women go there from as part of the government. Something else is that it is aligned to the International Statute of Human Rights. This is very important because there's a lot of there's lack of information, and from there, the agreement is there. That is because of all the different crimes cannot have amnesty, and among them sexual violence. So there was no agreement that would make it clear and as specific as we did. So that's what we have. We have an agreement that ended conflict. That's another element. Peace building is a process that takes 20 years. So we were able to get a really good agreement, maybe not perfect, but the second job was to implement, and we had clear elements. Women and children, young women that would get there, and we're talking about crimes against humanity. And number two, that women start being part of the implementation at those instances, those places of power, because we're working in those things that are in favor of life. And number three is we need to know how this is being implemented, and if this is in agreement with what was accepted. This month is going to be 4 years since we signed on the November 26th, and we're going to see what happened in this 4th years. We need to work on this. We are in a partnership with an organization that works in different topics, and here we're going to be working with the data and the importance of having clear, specific data that allows us to see the advances in the agreement, and how do we connect the local agenda with the international agenda. And then we can see the commissioner talks about OBCS, about sustainable development, about the 17 sustainable development goals, and how this is going to affect in a positive manner the lives of so many people. And the right in this activity with the agreement connected for a powerful message, and that is the peace agreement signed, approved in the legislative action. If it's applied, then it turns into an excellent historical opportunity to move forward in the compliance of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and as route and movement for women, SDG 5, that is gender equality, and SDG 16, that is peace, institutions, and justice. So our information is based on this. All of this is trying to look how the development and implementation allows us to move forward in the compliance of the agenda that is 2030. This is very powerful, and I'm going to say something that we say in Colombia. Colombia goes outside as a government, as a state, and signs all the international agreements and the commitment with the 2030 agenda. So a way to generate more responsibility, strength for the implementation to move forward is going to be through this message. So this is a powerful message. Why? Because after so many things, the new president is going to be there. And this new president comes from a group that is the Democratic Center that is opposing the agreement and that is looking to stop the implementation of the agreement. And how is he going to do this? By removing resources, decelerating the implementation, and guarantees a strong exercise in order to remove one thing that is basic. It's item number 5. And then I go to something that I had not said that is very important in the agreement. That is an agreement that is uh, part of all of this. These are very important elements. And here we start presenting what has to do with all the information that we have. The agreement that allows us to achieve in this activity for the construction of the map to get there. There are 5 items in the agreement. I'm going to try to be very swift, but I want to create the desire to go and look for more. We have 5 items in the agreement: participation, end of the conflict, solution to the problem of illegal drugs, and in the agreement, we find in the integral rule point. So this is an item that allows to achieve that women have land and opportunities to move forward. Can you see it? Okay. The agreement here has something that is the development programs. We have 170 municipalities that have been hurt by conflict, and they are impressively abandoned. So this turned into the areas where most people are really affected. And this is important to start making the proposals, to start really giving back to the municipalities, building the peace. This is something very, very specific, and we would find with the all the 16 areas are the proposals in order to move forward with the rural reform. These are advances for 10 years. The agreement has an agenda for 20 years, 1,087 proposals that are part of all of this. They touch 169 goals of the SDGs. And additionally, we looked at the activity with the indicators of the official agenda, but also the indicators that have to do with the gender index of the SDGs developed by EM 2030. That is looking at all of this for the advances of women and children. These indicators that are going to have an effect, and it has also built some new indicators. And we feel that this is so important because if we start looking at this message that we are discussing is a message that really works, and it's a powerful message. And I'm going to show you another graph. Another graph here that has to do with this. This activity that we have put together. We took the pillars of PDT and what SDGs, how many indicators are here? What are those key indicators for women and children? What are those specific indicators for gender index of SDGs? And also with the 2030 agenda, what are the measures and what are the key elements for women? And here we have found something interesting that I want to discuss. Traditionally, they think that women only talk about education, health, and care. And we start finding that a lot of the indicators that are there, women have done a great level of participation in topics of economy, production, improvements, education. So we start demystifying the places where we place women in the different activities for debate and construction of life. So that's the first item. And I'm not going to use so much time because I want to move forward. Number two, I want to move. And I want to say that even if you're not advancing, well, when we look at the compliance, we still have a look that breaks things down, that doesn't do an implementation in integral matter. We will see this a little bit later. This is one of the items here, that the government, the current government, has been doing some elements, and we have been looking at the resources and the territory and has been decelerating everything. We can see that this is very important because it also created a figure that is called the Special Missions for Peace. That was a way to have participation in the entire process of implementation, and if they could get where they had to get, even though it's ratified in the agreement, it has not been complied with. In the topic of participation, it's still very low compliance. It has not been complied with. Another item that had been proposed, it was the entire topics of having everything that is part of the agreement in participation. We still have a low participation, high deficit of non-compliant. I go to item 3. Item 3 that has to do with conflict. Item 3 is so important because it's related with people that were in combat, ex-soldiers, and with respect to have them back in the economy, in the politics, people that were part of the agreement and left the war. And here there's some key elements, and women that have come back have been making all of this political changes, some advances. They continue generating in a series of programs, and how, as organized women, started building and doing or working in this internal the conflict, doing everything. And with respect to conflict and incorporation, it's still the right to life. And in 2019, 77 ex-combat people were murdered. All of this, 133 murders and 29 attempts of murder. This means that people that believed in the peace process and to start building peace that was long lasting was so important. To this, we add all the difficulties that they're having in order to fulfill the reincorporation programs. There's a lot of deficit. There's a lot of work in order to continue moving forward to find that the conditions, the proper conditions should be given and to protect the lives of people. And this is important. Why? Well, it's important because we strengthen the life of the people that have been reincorporated. We have been able to lower and to eliminate the threats of murders, and this would strongly help achieving a lot of the SDGs 5, 4, 17 indicators such as 16, 1.1 that has to do with GDAS 16 in peace. So that's so important. But in this topic of conflict, we cannot set aside the all the SDGs and the human rights advocates, and we have a red flag for the positioning, and it's throughout this time there have been so many things, so many threats that of men and women that are leaders that also defend this agreement. And this is very important to start transforming. And this is where we have a huge problem with the current government, and to have a position that we can see with the protection of the leaders. And the main areas are the areas where right now we have the implementation of Taquia, Antioquia, Cariño, the northern part of Santander. In 2019, 108 people that were leaders and who defended human rights were murdered in Colombia. And out of them, 15 were women, 2 LGTB persons. And in 2019, those 108 people meant 50% more than what happened in 2018. So this is very serious what we have in front of us. And when we look at violence against women, well, this is last year, we had 176 women that were murdered in Cauca, Bahia Cauca, Atlántico, Nariño, Antioquia. They're still the states with the highest levels of murders, feminicides. We use the terminology of feminicides or female homicides because we make the analysis, the particular analysis, we distinguish it different in just to start. I think I went over the 20 minutes. You set an alarm. Okay, I can close.
There was another very important item here. It has to do, although I am not going into greater detail talking about the victim situation because Alejandra has already shared that with us, but item four and the drug situation This has to do with a comprehensive policy in terms of consumption of substances. And this has something to do with women, of course, because women have made so many proposals on this. And unfortunately, the policy has no gender perspective. And this is really not even taking into account many of the proposals made, because if that comprehensive policy and mainly if the use of substances is increased, well, what can we then say about the SDGs? Hunger, well-being, health, clean water, decent jobs, education, the peace building measures, consumption, and sustainable cities and communities. And this item, I think it is very important. It has to do with crops of drugs here. And here we still see a lot of difficulties because these are the PNIS. These are the programs we have launched. And we also have the early alert system in terms of those crops. And we now have an administration that wants to not respect everything agreed on in the past. It wants to go back to the use of fumigation. So this government knows exactly what the use of fumigants implies, rather, for the nature itself and pollution. Item 5, just to say that transitional justice for peace moves forward, and also search of the disappeared. We've already designed a national plan for the search of the disappeared, and women of all universities are participating. And this is truly developing as an activity, perhaps the one with the fastest growth, as a matter of fact. And about 50% of those interviewed in this project are women. And this requires, of course, President Duque and Uribe have to look at this in a very comprehensive fashion. What is the conclusion? Implementation and agreement. This is the roadmap to move forward on the SDGs. 2, we have to implement everything that was agreed. 3, we have to really update and protect the agreement. If this is not done, 20 years from now, the roadmap won't even exist. We cannot say that Colombia lives in peace. And it's important to speed up the implementation and to do it in a very comprehensive, integral manner. Everything depends on everything else. Everything is interconnected. And this is important for Colombia to live in peace now and in the future with social justice. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. I think that with your presentation, those of us following us may find how in women organizations, particularly through the Pacific Route or the Ruta Pacifica movement, we are accompanying the participation of women in those different measures for implementation of the agreement, but we're also doing an exercise of guaranteeing that those 130 measures on the agreement or on the peace agreements may materialize to improve living conditions of girls and women in the country. As you've mentioned, we've taken steps ahead. However, there are still many challenges we continue facing. And from the roadmap and from the route and civil society, our defense continues being for the agreement and also defending life. This has implied many things for Colombia. Sandra, thank you so much. Now let us give the floor to Erika. Erika, yes, she is the coordinator of the Women's Path to Peace. in the Coffee Belt region, Erika Vanessa Tobon Gonzalez. She works in aesthetic and creation projects at the Pereira University. She will be talk about sensitive experience in Santa Ana in the Ruiz Alta department in Colombia. Let's give the floor to Erika. I am going to share the screen. Please tell me when I should be showing your presentation on the screen. Yes, thank you. Let me see. Very well. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. As Gina was saying, I'm Erika Tobon. I am doing my thesis on aesthetics and creation. I'm part of the coordinating group of the Peace Route for Women. I've been a feminist for a long time. I'm very interested in academic processes to integrate everything we do through this peace route or path and everything we're fighting in the social movement and in the armed conflict and the experience women have had. Gina is sharing with us so much material and experiences, but I also wanted to tell you about my project. The title is Configuration of the Sensitive Experience of Memory. Women are talking about their experience in the armed conflict. Next one. This is the county of Santa Ana in the municipality of Huatica Risaralda. Yes, this is in the Huatica municipality, as I have said. Well, this is where we started the project, and this is part of the work I do as an activist in the Women's Peace Route. After going to many municipalities, you see here in green the Risaralda municipality and the Huatica Risaralda, that's the exact name. And they are divided into municipalities, and this is the Huatica municipality. They are divided into districts and also villages or towns. So we have this is the smallest segment of the municipal structure in Santa Ana. After going to most of the municipalities you see on this map, and after looking at the processes of memories and truths of women in this municipality, I started getting very interested in everything I found. This is a small segment of Colombia. After many approaches we had in the peace route movement throughout the armed conflict, we started looking into those conditions. And here you see how in this territory, this is the coffee belt, and public policies for all three departments or states have to do with social historic issues, trying to make the armed conflict invisible. And however, we are making visible the history of this territory. Women were always left behind. They were always lagging behind in this territory. So we started tracking things down and using the media for this tracking process to look at the armed conflict. And these are the data we found for the Santa Ana County. We do not yet have qualitative analysis to tell us more than we can see here. This is historic memory, but there's no detailed analysis. So this is a lag we have. And this is something we have to continue analyzing to better understand the armed conflict in this part of Colombia. We have to remember exactly that in this territory, something which was quite visible were the actions of the armed conflict. And they had a significant impact on the territory you see on this map. Very well. Who are those very courageous women? They're women of this county that played such an important role in terms of aesthetics, the research I'm doing, aesthetics and creation. We see that sensitivity is an important part of all this. These are women who share silence, and they all have this sensation of not being listened to, and they were not even recognized throughout the armed conflict. Many things happened between the 90s and the year 2000. All the armed groups were present in that territory, the paramilitary, the guerrilla movements, and the army and the police forces were also there, but mainly highlighting the guerrilla groups without saying that the other armed actors were not present. They were. And they were also quite responsible for things that went on. Well, they were very courageous women, solitary women, always wanting to live out in the countryside, not in the cities. They love their territory. They are big fighting women, and they protect the land. And they were also in charge of reconstructing the social fabric after the guerrilla presence. Victimizing actions. What did this woman go through, regardless of what happened at the beginning and something we saw at the observatory project? First, they want everyone to understand that they were most affected by the armed conflict, the most affected segment of the population. That's what they want because they lived out in the countryside and they think they haven't had enough repairing activities from the authorities. They have to be recognized as the most affected by the armed movement. And the guerrilla warfare started in 2001, and the women were like housekeepers, their maids, and they had forced labor. And they had to cook for the guerrilla soldiers, and sometimes they were threatening the women, they were harassing the women, and cooking became very important for women in that territory. And they would also have their chicken and for the guerrilla soldiers that would use them for their meals, and they see disappearance of their children, spouses and relatives, and homicides of children, and forced displacements and sexual violence, of course. This is something that people don't talk about so much. People don't mention this issue related to sexual violence as part of this armed conflict. And of course, kidnapping of relatives, the abduction of many of these women's relatives and family members. So here you see also lack of information, or rather misinformation. The guerrilla groups in this county. This is just a story in the El Tiempo 2001, a story talking about the guerrilla attacks and the number of people who died, and the battalion, San Mateo de Pereira, what happened, what the problem was, and how the guerrilla clashed with the armed forces of the government. Well, this is to show how facts are minimized. Everything that happened in this territory is quite minimized. We also see the interest of covering up all that information of what was really happening there. So in this guerrilla taking over of the town, of the territory, in this takeover, in this particular confrontation, just one person died and there was someone wounded. However, what's behind all this? What about people's anxiety and fear? Men taking other men to be part of the guerrilla movement, and the situation of the brothers of this woman who were taken by force by the guerrilla forces, and also very sensitive experiences these women had, how each family became an important part of this process. And in one way or the other, they were all affected by the guerrilla takeover of that territory. And what about the police forces? The women, how did they see people getting killed and where their bodies were thrown? And then they became the disappeared of that territory. And the women at the same time having to cook for the guerrilla. And this is an experience of how civil society and women start playing a very important role in all this. This is not voluntary work. This is something they had to do. So this is the creation aesthetics research we did. This is the qualitative element of it. This is intertwining theory with creation. How did we go about doing this? And where was I positioned in terms of memory, in terms of sensitizing people and showing the armed conflict from a different angle? Many people deny the armed conflict. However, how can you use photography, museums, memories, memoirs, culture, sculpture, poetry, all those artistic manifestations used to show the armed conflict in a different manner, to sensitize civil society? And if I talk about this county of Santa Ana, I could not just talk about it, I have to give people other elements for people to understand. And for me to get people's attention, I have to tell them what was happening there. I cannot just say, well, there was an armed conflict, period. I have to talk about very sensitive and sensible things that happened. We have two chapters here. One is sensitive memories from the armed conflict, and the second chapter is sensitive experiences of women in that territory within the framework of the armed conflict. This is chapter 1, sensitive memories of the armed conflict. And these are theoretical components that are so important in the work I did here with my team. Well, I found feminism and aesthetics go hand in hand. It's a complex combination. So I'm not going into great detail, but I did want those two terms to hold a very sensitive dialogue. So the first thing we have is the discussion on why women are directly affected by the armed conflict and how those affectations are increasing and become more acute because of the gender perspective. And this becomes a territory of controversy and disputes. And the women of the peace route and the Truth Commission women worked together. And this was very relevant to see how the armed conflict affected women's lives and bodies. And we worked with Gloria Amparo Sanchez, who's also doing a lot of research on this. So this is solidarity, women within the armed conflict. And this started being a reflection on memory as a testimony. And this was worked out by Joan Carles Melich and Nellie Richard. This is not a linear process. This is not a linear process. This is a process with ups and downs and a very zigzagging process that has to do with the effect this historical political process has on women and how women anguish has an impact on everything they go through, everything they see, how they come to the present, and then they go back to the past and look into their own futures. And then they start in 2001, but they don't have a linear recount. They go from the present to the past and also looking into the future. And Melich spoke about testimonials and silence as a common gesture. And fraternity, sorority among women, also as a social gesture. And how sensitivities affect women and the structure of society. That which is sensitive has an impact because there are ways of being for established orders. There are also stereotypes on gender. And we also looked at how I situate myself in society. This, of course, determines my experience in the world and my own sensitivity and how the world is imposing on me how I feel, what I am. And silence as a common gesture, that's also very important. How women at the beginning say nothing, they're ashamed, they are not heard, and how they are pressed by their families and how they feel. Families say, well, sometimes the only thing you can do is to keep silent. You cannot say more than what you really think. And women's silence, women's fear to speak out because they might be re-victimized. And I also went, as I have said, into something called sorority as a social gesture. This is work done by Marcela Lagarde and Jacques Rancière. And this has to do with political aesthetic elements among women, contemporary feminism, and the building of memory and social fabric. And we left the sensitive part, and we are also proposing other ways of relating to each other and how those other ways of relating to each other allow us to resist within this framework in terms of reconstruction and memory. And finally, de Rancière and Lagarde and Rancière talk about women's expressions. That is how they express their political memories, loaded with a lot of questions, proposals, resistance, and political memory women have. This is chapter 2, sensitive experiences. This is the methodology we used. Sensitive experiences of women. This is the methodological component with a feminist approach. This means that this is a cross-cutting analysis, including the methodology we used. And well, we've been talking about also the participation of women in the armed conflict, and also participation of women in the peace route. These are things that have taught us so many lessons, especially work we did in 2011. How do we look at those women? And this has to do with research and how this is generated and this solidarity. This is part of my methodology. And this has to do with aesthetic scenario, creative aspects, the theoretical aspect that is so important for this. Writing is an act of creation, and what about our relationship with authors writing about this topic? So is this a creative framework we're talking about through the configuration of theoretical scenarios and also the geographic coverage where the armed conflict affected women so much? So we visited those places through many of the municipalities, Pereira, Huatica, and different places to reach territory that also implies lack of sensitivity. And as a research and a woman, going to this territory was very important for me. And 3, generated spaces of dialogue and listening to women, individual spaces where we're able to listen to women and know their experiences within the framework of the armed conflict. These are spaces of dialogue and spaces to listen to women. These are some drawings here you see, some sketches. These women were able to show everything they had gone through in the armed conflict. Well, the church is important, the school, the cars mean they can travel, they believe. Their territory was affected by the armed conflict, so they call it as a corridor between 2 municipalities. So this plays an important role. And the bottom one, you see that right in the circle. This is the meeting place, the square, the main square, the homes, the church, and the arrows. That's where the armed forces would be going through. And we have to recognize that it's not only the testimony that's important, but they can also be written ones. And this is thinking about the artistic manifestation, and those manifestations, those creative gestures are also loaded with political content on my part and on their part to allow for expressing their memory this way. Creative gesture emergency. That's what I was mentioning a few minutes ago with the creative component, which is theoretical. The women started realizing this, and the creative gesture to do many projects.
that would allow for people to listen to them and to be the fabric of what I was thinking. Initially, throughout the path, there was just part of it. But one day, with respect to the work that was done, I thought that not only is it creative and my sensitivity was also there, subjectivity was also there, and victims of armed conflict, and to accept all of this, my concerns and daily life, and think that this could be creative, and it might seem that it was not part of everything. And last, I was able to see, I wanted to show you clearly, and that's the way that this is looking like, and how between what they say, what I say, there's certain things that are significant for them. And this is a little bit about what's sensitive, and they are going to have all the experience and the memory of armed conflict. And initially, they have areas that the noise of barking dogs, and that there were a lot of threats. People started to leave. There were a lot of problems. And at the end of the day, there were so many things, so many changes. And then the financial part. At the end, the dog barking. Why barking dog? Everything has a meaning. It's not just it makes sense, but at the territory, it's when the dogs bark, that means that there aren't people walking around. So they say that dogs bark because of that reason. So this is what I write with respect to what they say. In Santana, there are traces of a past that is familiarized with dogs barking, and all the noise in the mountains, and also the chicken moving their wings. Elsewhere in Colombia, this turned into terror, being afraid and having to hide. They say that they were going to kill us because we were not, we didn't expect to wake up awake, alive, because we thought that the next day we were going to be opening doors and windows, and there was going to be death around us. That you can't describe what it feels. At the end, we can say we didn't have children just to send them to war. You can lose the most precious thing. Also, the women that we listen to. Thank you, Erika, for your presentation. And I think we could open the conversation, the concern that this could be related with what has been discussed with respect to the need of discussing what has happened as a country from other points of view. And we can see this from academic language. So here we can discuss this. And we're going to give the floor right now to Sebastián Giraldo Aguirre. Sebastián, sociologist with a Magister in Gender Studies from Colmex, and currently in the University of Campinas in Brazil, the School of Guadalupe Zapata, Feminist School in Pereira for about 3 years. Sebastián is going to present us the gender diversity and in armed conflicts in Colombia. We're going to be sharing the screen. Good afternoon, everyone. Every time I have the opportunity to be part at a meeting in Mexico, I always like to start thanking, and I recall the years that I stayed there, and to thank more than the state, the Mexican people for hosting me, and because I also had a scholarship to get my master's. So I have a lot to thank from Mexico in my academic history and personal history. I also want to thank Gina and La Ruta, the Pacific Route of Women. It makes it very special, something very special for me because I'm so close to Gina, Erica, and other colleagues. And I have been able to see what it means to be a man in a country like Colombia when we're going through what we go through, and also to acknowledge those that were before us, all those stories that came before what I'm going to mention, the feminist movements and women movements that have been basic to be able to reflect on these topics about sexual diversity and gender diversity, and what's happening with armed conflict and what can happen. These have been fundamental for all of this. And the National Center of Historical Memory that has been here. And some researchers that are the reference in these topics. Investigators like Nancy Prados. And a lot of the things that I'm going to be sharing throughout my presentation are resulting from what we see in all of the different organizations and these investigators. With respect to the introduction, we have to start with something fundamental. Colombia is one of the first cases worldwide when it's being considered at the level of the government, the victimization in armed forces. They used to say that this is precedent for gender justice in general, particularly in those LGBT issues. It's basic that we are discussing this. This condition is a product of the historical realities that are concentrated in the permanence of conflict during this process of focus of LGBT in our country. All of this have been learned in the last decade. Countries such as Guatemala, Salvador, armed conflicts, some LGBT organizations where we can see the work in victimization of these groups. But later, after the peace negotiations, the conditions of truth, and this is why it's so important, this precedent. Another image about the historical movement. My presentation was set in three, separated in three. I'm going to be talking very quickly about this. about this topic, and we're going to be telling you about what are these challenges. The prior speakers also, maybe we're talking about this, and we're talking about the challenges in this agenda in the framework of this process and the transition in Colombia. So this first part about the history of LGBT and the framework of armed conflict, the origin of this in the gendered perspective and armed conflicts comes from these services in the 80s when feminist movements started to uh, talk about what was going on in war with women. Such perspectives, the gender perspective is consolidated a lot more with nationwide exhortations that were geared to the government of Colombia. Situations such as the Constitution in 1991, national conferences, conference in Beijing in 1995, and last, the resolution from the UN 1325 are basic to bring all of this in the gender focus with the state. Gender diversity from the 1990s, where we could see that they became a lot more relevant, basic for the institutionalization for the LGBT agenda. When we look at this, we're talking about the first part of this. The first LGBT organizations are the ones that from birth have the job of looking at this within the framework with the initiative that has been created in the government. And this was one of the first collectives to appoint the transgender people in our territory, where we could see the confrontations. And later on, we could see organizations like Colombia, Santa Maria, the city of Cali in 2005, and also from the Caribbean coast in Colombia. This was created, and they've had the most incidents in armed conflicts and transitional processes in Colombia. So this has been work about acknowledgement, about looking at the results. As an answer to those things from those organizations, the Colombian state, it's in the second half of this period, started to look about gender diversity in armed conflict. Some entities, such as the National Entity for Repair, then there are some questions, there's some elements later on in another agenda for the replacement of lands. They were looking at the different sectors that were part of the victims, among which there were the LGBT population. Well, we could see victims that are have been looking at the politics and attention to victims at the National Center of Historical Memory, two organizations that included clearly LGBT perspective in their frameworks of action. After the peace agreements with the FARC, sexual diversity was a topic that started becoming more and more important in organizations as LGBT started to look in the Commission of the Truth and are taking into account such a focus. And from this, the historical history, the historical part. Let's look at the balance, or at the what we want to say, the results of this. Okay, we're here. As we look at the end results, the first one sets in political territory This is basic. The National Center of Historical Memory has here a report that is going to be looking at the difference. And they want to set a moral order where we can see an order in gender and in the sexual part. This is basic in the economy of war. Armed groups are not really looking deep in these categories, but the political and moral orders consider this deeply. As I have mentioned, I'm a follower of Guillermo Núñez Noriega. He is a specialist in masculinity, and he has been working in the gender order in the northern part of Mexico. So from his statements, we might understand that armed conflict with a device that looks at gender and sexuality, that all of this is not only looking as dissidents, but all parties, even those that are defined from the dominating categories. From that point on, we can understand the second idea in this. So from understanding armed conflict as a device that brings gender and sexuality, then we go to the second item, gender expression, sexual orientation, become triggers of victimization. And this has really been seen all the reports of the National Center of Historical Memory, and for sure, this is going to be reported in the Commission for Truth in the report, and also a compilation of all this information in the territories. And last, in this balance, we must understand what is happening as a continuum. This notion or concept known as what is called gender violence can be considered to look at LGBT populations in Colombia. Before conflict, there were structural, historical, homophobic, transphobic violence that stayed during conflict and still are there. Can we go to the next one? The National Registry of the Victims. We have 3,720 LGBT victims in one single number that, as we were told, of almost 9 million victims in the country. And when we go and looking more just specifically all the different victimizing facts of this population, we can see how the forced displacement, the threat, sexual crimes represent a lot more problems. And we can combine different variables in order to achieve more geography in the victimization. And last, but not least, this is the last part where I believe that I'm going to take longer. I'm going to be talking about the series of challenges. And here is important to mention where I come from. As Gina said, right now, I'm working on my PhD. This is my first year. And that started 4 years ago. the thing of ex-combats that had sexual practices with others. And in that academic path, I had the opportunity to publish some papers, but this year I have been writing some reflections. And I don't know if this can be read as unorganized, but this is with all the guidelines that can generate tension. And to think about LGBT and armed conflict. I'm going to mention under registry and silences. People are not registered as LGBT victims. 9 million, just 3,720 people. This could be much bigger, but we're talking about something where many conditions participate, many political situations. With respect to all of this, some re-victimization, lack of access to state organizations, and the lack of trust in this. And with respect to the silence, that is a little bit what has been mentioned by Erica in the prior presentation, we have to understand what that is. This is not just a silence, but this is institutional, as a silence that is produced in the community. Those communities that can participate in the construction of this piece, in these silences bring challenges. In order to try to uncover certain silences, different things that might be coordinated to open up silence cannot turn into something that is colonizing and devastating, something that is going to open that architecture of violence and and this is the basis of the emotions of a subject to become experts of all of this. Another challenge in the methodology in politics with respect to silence. Justice is set up for the word, for testimony, and for facts, which is the opposite of hiding everything in the silence of sexuality. In Colombia, justice for peace and the Commission for Truth are there, but the institutional architecture of transitional justice has been built with legal logic, a scenario where we can see the facts and testimony as probatory basics of a material truth and reality on top of other perspectives of reality, like what is symbolic, the representations, lyrics, fantasy, traumatic items, desired, realities where sexuality is part. In order to go to the next item. Truth, justice, repair, and guarantee of non-repetition. With respect to truth, guarantee looking for the truth in LGBT victims and sexual diversity and gender is not easy. Feeling a sense of belonging because of ethnic origin. The differences have a direct incidence in legal topics as well as political to build the truth. With the condition of vulnerability, we have more possibilities of having this. With respect to justice, tolerance, and institutional problems, in many cases, they are reproducing homophobia. For this reason, we need that the perspective of sexual diversity, its focus in attention to the victims in all instances at the national order all the way. Here we have to think how this has a repercussions or has any limitations with respect to the repair. There's something extremely important is that the LGBT population can help us so difference to other areas that have the same political support so they can ask for the rights to be respected and repairs. We have seen here how the movements of women and feminists have been an important stakeholder to empower politically, but to also place in the public agenda all the topics about women victimization. This political empowerment, this political history is not the same with the organization or the leaders of LGBT groups with respect to the guarantees of not repeating history. Aleja was mentioning how to implement gender perspective within a historical Colombian, regional, and worldwide period. How are we going to set the guarantees of non-repetition at a historical period in a world scenario where there's a proliferation of structural homophobia? With respect to memory, the reconstruction of historical memory has to be something that in this case has a disturbance in areas where this has been built, particularly the conditions that took us to that type of violence. Going to social and political legitimacy of LGBT, there's tension between what it's worth to have, to be witnessed and what doesn't. We can see different topics and a lot of the things that are hiding. This tension comes from a frequency that is legitimate for transitional justice. For this, from now, from the first years of all of this, we have to consider the limits with intention or not, but even more with all the topics that relate to LGBT. Maybe they don't want to go, they don't want to get to a certain places of war. The background of some other transitional topics are a fact about how 20 to 30 years later in other countries, they're just starting with this. With respect to another topic, the emphasis in gender identity, I believe that it's extremely important for everything that is implementing all of this in LGBT. And it is that the perspective of implementing the different transitional organizations that they were part of two categories in the sexual identity and gender identity, with leaving everything aside, the expressions of gender and sexual practice. For example, we've heard how men with long hair, or if they were in the earring, they were being discriminated against. Maybe they were heterosexual and they were the target of victimization. But if sexual orientation, they're going to go into the other panel. We have to start closing. Maybe just to close down because we are out of town, if out of time, if you can just end your presentation. Okay. I don't have any conclusions. I was looking at the rest of the challenges, so. Maybe it was a mistake because I didn't look at time. I'm sorry. And we have another panel, so we don't have time to discuss. I was looking at the chat and we don't have questions, but I would like to close, if it's possible, about these challenges. I'm going to read the last one that is related with the state. There was no logical order, and I thought it was important just to mention all of them here. So in order to close, articulation of LGBT agenda brings some reflection on the work of the state conflict resolution and transitional processes become different actions for societies, and this can bring along certain actions, particularly when you discuss different topics. This reconfiguration would mean new borders that would establish who are going to be protected by the state. At the same time, would redefine the mechanisms of management, control, and criminalization of those populations. And for that reason, we should not forget and just think that the transitional process is not there. It's not only good, but they could be harmful. And we have the permanence of the order of gender and sex. We have to consider that the hope of transition is also at the end. I think it's a good closing. Okay, Sandra, Sebastián, you have to continue with the same panel. And we can see what the transition in Colombia is going to be, and I think it could be a reflection what is coming up and what is going on in Mexico right now. And what Sebastián says, it's very good to say that this transitional process has so much of what's new, of what is so hopeful for the society in Colombia, but also it has the continuity of the ghost of violence that do not want to leave, and we have a huge uh, uh, challenge to be able to overcome it. And I think we have to close.